Okay.
Fine. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining with us today. A warm welcome to all of you to this session of Narrating Difference, a Comparative Literature Research Forum. We have Samya Brata Roy with us today, and his session is titled Electronic Literatures. Before we get started, I'd like to share a bit about the history of this research forum. The students of the Department of Comparative Literature and India Studies at the English and Foreign Languages University, Hyderabad, have been organizing research forums regularly. Since its inception in 2018, the student led initiative provides an academic space for dialogue, exchange, and critical reflection, bringing together scholars from diverse disciplines and research interests. The research forum, now named Narrating Difference, continues to strive in its effort to invite and host people across disciplines, borders, and perspectives. We are grateful to have Shaumya with us today. Before we begin, I would like to inform you all that this session is being recorded and will be uploaded to the Narrating Difference YouTube channel. I'd also like to inform you that we have a Google form pinned in the comment section for those of you who wish to join the mailing list. Dr. Saumya Brother Roy is an assistant professor of English and the coordinator of Digital Technology and Cultural Change Cluster at the Center for Asian Studies at Geetham, deemed to be University, Hyderabad. He works in the fields of electronic literature, video game studies, and digital humanities. He's an affiliate faculty at San Diego State University, an affiliated researcher with University of Regensburg, and has a PhD from IIT Jodhpur. He has been fellows with University of London, ELO, and hashtag in the past. He co-founded ELIT India and wears multiple administrative hats across a smattering of academic communities both nationally and internationally. We welcome you, Shaumya. You can start your talk now. I request everyone to please keep your microphones muted during the talk.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. I hope I am audible to everybody. Hi, everyone. My name is Shammo. Thank you so much for having me here. It is really a pleasure for me to address people who are mostly from my alma mater, that is FU. When I, in the off chance that I get to visit my old campus, I would love to catch a glimpse of all of you guys and say hi. But for now, we'll have to do with this virtual exchange, and I will talk about predominantly the field where I work, which is electronic literature, some of the work that I have done, and we do together as a group as well, and what are the implications, politics, and challenges of doing that type of work in literary studies and also in India. So let's get started. I will share my PPT. Please let me know if that is visible. Is it visible?
Yeah, it is visible to me.
It's visible, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay. And now, once again, thank you so much for having me. My talk is titled Electronic Literatures with a bit of a question mark. And across this talk, I would like to take you on a little bit of an intellectual journey to understand why this S, what does it do, why is it there, and all of that. But before that, I want to invite you really to engage in this kind of an exploration about the different types of electronic literature texts. And I hope to show one or two here and there, or at least give you some examples. So first off, I would like to start with this text called Enter Sultana's Reality by Afra Shafiq. Afra Shafiq is a multimedia artist, and she combines different aspects of text, media, sound, memory, archival images to create multimodal textual experiences. I will take you to that site in a moment. Then comes, we have something called The Good Citizen by Pankhuri Zahir. Now, what you see here is called A Good Citizen. And in the home screen or the opening screen that I have shown over there in front of you, I'll just read out a few lines. It says, Namaskar, welcome, good citizen. We believe in your innate goodness, your rational thinking, and your superpowers of empathy. And below that, you have two lines that says, this is a lot for me. And the next line says, okay, let's go. The first two lines are in white. The last two lines are in blue. That means that because this is done in a platform called Twine that supports interactive narrative creation, right? Uh, The ones that are in blues, those are hyperlinks basically. Those are nodes. If you click on them, one branch of a particular narrative opens up. If you click on the other one, the other branch of a narrative opens up. Unfortunately, The Good Citizen by Pankhu Zahir is currently not available for me to browse, which is a problem in electronic literature, that just like performances, it can also sometimes be ephemeral in nature. Then, to give you another very tangible example of ephemerality, which we have Cloakroom by Rogu or Rogue, however you want to call that. It was the first SMS novel that was recognized from India. And other electronic literature scholars like Shanmuga Priya have also mentioned about that. Now, it was circulated via text message services, or the short messaging service, as it used to be called during the early days. And it was basically something that was written using the SMS languages. And maybe some of you might be young or not young to remember the SMS languages that at least I have grown up using. Good morning, GDMRNG, see you tomorrow, and the two is with the two MRW. The entire quote unquote novel is written in that linguistic style, but it was archived as a part of this blog post, but now it's no longer there. So once again, we come back to the ephemeral conditions of this text. I will take you to the one website that is working, and then show you how multimodality works, how the interactions between different forms of media creates a different layer of signification, honestly. But before that, before I go there, I would like to show you something else. This is done by my friend who calls himself a creative coder, Praveen Sinha. This is called Leaning Haiku, right? As you can see, this is an AR filter on Instagram. At least it was at that point of time an AR filter in Instagram. I have not checked this out for a very long time. I will share my slides with you, and you can go around and play with it. Even if you can't play with it right now, you can ask me for links anytime. My contacts would be displayed, and I would be happy to assist you and help you regarding accessing these artifacts if that is possible. Now, what you see here by Praveen Sinha is called something that he calls a leading haiku, where basically he has written a few lines of code, and something that he has also written about in the 30 Medium blog, the screenshot that you see right here. The text is called Leading Haiku, AR Tech, Generative Text, and Body Gestures. Please remember that this blog post was done by Dharti, and I was the person who commissioned without payment, actually commissioned Praveen to write this. And this is generative text that we are talking about, which was done way, way, way before the public knew anything about Chat GPT. So I think that is something that we must take into consideration, that all of us and people that have been working decades before us in electronic literature, for people like us, the moment of AI that people are losing their collective minds over, or generative text for that matter, or this whole moment of predictive algorithmic mechanics is something that has been very gradual, that has been really coming for a long, long time. So historicizing that and going back to that kind of textuality really helps us really contextualize it. But going back to leaning haiku, so this is also AR tech, right? Which means augmented reality. It gathers your body gesture. So when you tilt your head from side to side, it reads that particular bent of motion, and then it starts generating pieces of text based on the very simple lines of code that Praveen wrote, really. So this is also one type of electronic literature. So you can have SMS novels, you can have people playing with augmented reality, and with your body the gesturality comes into the picture, and you can also have elaborate interactive narratives done on Twine that are fairly simple, that take you from one node to the other based on clicks. Imagine a Wikipedia page, fairly simple but difficult to create, because you have to map out a narrative across the lanes and by lanes, where you yourself as the author might get lost, if I am allowed to use the term author. And cloakroom, so obviously there is different media archaeology that comes into the picture because of the very, very important materiality of the Symbian phone, the pre-smartphone phone with the keypads and the numbers and the alphabets within digits, of course. One digit would have three, four alphabets, and you have to press them a few times to get the desired alphabet, right? Now let's take a little bit of a detour to just look at Enter Sultana's Reality by Afra Shafiq. Now, as you may have guessed, Afra Shafiq's Enter Sultana's Reality is a direct inspiration from Sultana's Dream by Begum Rokeya. And it uses this kind of proposition about dreaming of a feminist utopia. It uses that and it combines with archival images, and it talks about the history of feminism in India. So it becomes very metatextual, if you want to use that particular term. So let's take a look at Enter Sultana's Reality. I will just switch my tab. Let me see if my broadband allows me to do that. It shouldn't be a problem. Okay. So I will is Enter Sultana's Reality visible to everyone?
Yes, yes.
Okay, fine. I will just load this page again, and I want you to pay a little attention to what happens at the very start. Did you notice a very fleeting depiction of a rolling pin making a roti? You may have missed it, so I will just play it again. For a very brief second, you have the gesture of a hand and a rolling pin. Now, if you observe very carefully, that is basically the buffering symbol. The longer your internet takes to load, the longer the hands flatten the rotis. So the markers are also used very genuine use of markers. And it says, "Are you ready to enter Sultana's reality? You are about to take a trip on the history of women and books in India. Start at the beginning, go on till and reach your end, and then stop. Move your cursor around to look for hidden notes. If you click on them, if you want to find out about the backstory, go to the submit page and add a story of your own," which I think they did not keep up with it. So now you say, "I am ready." It shows you a video about a girl who's falling to sleep and who's falling down a wormhole, and then you proceed to the next. Here, look at the pointer, look at the rolling pin. These are these buffering symbols and the pointer. So all these technological signs are repurposed to serve the purpose of this text, literally speaking. So, and now as you can see, it is taking a lot of time to open the page, which is why you see the roti being made again and again and again as the page is not opening up. So let's take a little bit of time to see when it actually comes up, because this is done with Adobe Flash and this is hosted by the browser itself. So this may take some time. So while I let it open, it is taking some time, and I will go back to my main presentation, right? And I'll come back to Sultana a little later when she's ready. So before, now that I showed you some examples, or almost showed you some examples, I would like to talk a little bit about electronic literature and how it has been theorized from an academic perspective. The crazy bunch of us, digital humanists, electronic literature people, we are always caught in a loop of defining what our field does, what our field is, what our field is not. What is electronic literature? What is digital humanities? What is video game studies? Maybe not video game studies, are fairly self-explanatory, really. So we always have this kind of a vow to ourselves, okay, this is the last time that we are going to introduce electronic literature. This is the last time we are going to define the field. But we are always stuck in a loop of defining it again and again and again. So, okay, let's go. So the first thing that I will be talking about is introductions. How many types can we introduce a particular type of field? So if you just look at these three images, so the first image on your left in the Chinese script, that is a text called I Ching, which is a very old, very ancient text, and it's a non-linear text. As you can see, that is very much written in print, and but it offers possibilities of non-linear reading. Across print literature, you will find multiple texts that explore dimensions of non-linearity in very, very different ways. Some people will literally have multiple endings. Which endings you want to choose? Choose your own adventure game books, for example. Or there will be texts that will weave endings at the start and then the start at the ending, and so on and so forth. And all of us, and most students of literature, will be replete with such examples of nonlinear narratives in print itself. But when we move to the digital affordance, how does it happen? Now let's look at the first image on the right. It says, "Duck, duck, you are my little affection, my beautiful appetite, my eager hunger, my covetous love lusts for your infatuation, my yearning anxiously clings to your fellow feeling, yours eagerly, NUC." Now, this is known as one of the earliest Anglophonic electronic literature texts. This is called the love letter generator. This was done during the World Wars with a Manchester Mark I old computer, where a simple algorithm was put behind the system and it would just generate love letters. If you just go to love letter generator, there is a website that has been restored by Professor Nick Montfort. And if you just keep playing with it, you will see that there is a very clear syntactical pattern that is used to repeat these love letters. And now let's come to the picture that is below the love letters. And I will just put the URL of Enter Sultana's Reality in the chat so that people can explore on their own, even if I don't get an opportunity to take you through the journey. Now let's look at hypertext. What is a hypertext? A hypertext, as you can see, the image of hypertext systems and a definition where it's a hypertext. It's talking about a hypertext, but then it is a hypertext also. So hypertext was basically something. Imagine a pre-internet era digital text that also works with nodes like a Wikipedia page, but it is rooted in the pre-internet days. There was also the same thing in the post-internet days, mind you, but it was very, very popular during the pre-internet days. And the very, very famous software company called Eastgate Systems, who used to be the pioneer of floppy disk-based interactive narrative publishing during that period of time. So very interestingly, all of these hypertext were popularized by the ACM, the American the body for engineers, Association for Computing and Machinery is ACM. And the old ACM conferences during the 80s had a lot of discussion about hypertext and hyperlinking systems. So if you listen to your Ted Nelsons, they will talk about coining the hypertext, and the effect that it had on literary studies is immense in terms of literary studies. And it is also extremely fascinating because in the ACM conference at that point of time, the early version of the modern internet by Professor Tim Berners-Lee was presented as a method of linking system. But that paper was rejected by the ACM people at that point of time because they said it is too unrealistic. It doesn't work, and the hypertexts are much better. But history has not been very kind. Let's say to the pioneers of hypertext. I'm just making an overstatement, but to give you a little bit of an historical understanding of how these things came to be, and so on. So now that I think Sultana has opened up, so I'll give you a glimpse before I proceed ahead. So if you can see this now, chapter 1, an inner world of their own, Andar Ki Baat, you see that there are stars twinkling. You see the pointers and you see the cursors. You see the girl as if the girl is looking at the stars twinkling. And then you see the archival images enmeshed with text. And then also we have videos. And then there is a commentary about the Antar Mahal was a space that women could not step out of. And then there are these beautiful archival images, which are, of course, taken from the CSSC archive, as you can see itself. Now, when you keep scrolling down, you will see things happening. You will see a comic forming. You will see these women who are talking about being free, about their own self-expression. And now you see the kind of a parody about playing something sexy and women just having a hookah or playing casino in a very asynchronous way, and then somebody who's singing, and then there are two women who are obviously talking about their sexual explorations, playing, which is also contextualized by saying how many female performers were active at that point of time in the Bengal census. And the Yo Mama jokes, they are replaced by. So these elements, they weave together and they create a completely different type of textuality. And when I say textuality, I go back to the Latin word, the Latin root of texo, that means to weave. So here, basically, it's a weaving of multimodal signs, really, to create meaning, not just dependent on the idea of the letter, so as to speak. So I'll stop sharing this, and I will return to my original slides. So now that we have an idea of the hypertexts and the other forms that electronic literature have taken and has taken, so now if we concentrate a little bit on the boring part, really, the theoretical part, after looking at such interesting texts, if we look at the theorizations, then there can be possibly what we can call a non-beginning, where there are multiple terminologies and there are many histories, right? John Cayley, for example, professor of the literary arts at Brown, he hated the term electronic literature, and he preferred networked writing in networked and programmable media or digital language arts. Doesn't really roll off the tongue. There are also terms like hypertext that I just showed you. There's a very important book written about hypertext. And then there is also cybertext. And then these concepts were pioneered by scholars like George Landau, and cybertext by Espen Orseth, of course. And there are significant overlaps with video game studies. Rosario, in this particular paper that I have mentioned, Origins of Electronic Literature, they talk about how the idea of terminology, which is a hypertext, what is a cybertext, what is electronic literature, what is digital literature, and interactive fiction, interactive digital narrative, and so on and so forth. This ultimately boils down to personal choices. You can always take up an episteme and do theorizations in your own regards, but ultimately it creates a mess. But if we really pinpoint electronic literature as the kind of framework to choose, so then we can find that there is a centrality of the generational model. And N. Catherine Hales, the very famous post-human philosopher, is the godparent of the field, and her 2008 monograph, Electronic Literature, New Horizons for the Literary, lays out two generations of electronic literature. The first generation is the pre-web, as I showed you, the hypertext, link-driven, but still very print-like. You can still print out all the notes. And then she says there is something called second generation electronic literature, which is post-web, where you have all this multimedia and interactivity, as I showed you with Sultana's reality, right? And then comes the third generation that is not posited by Hales, which is given by Leo Flores, who also happens to be my PhD co-supervisor, who talks about the elements of virality and remixability, especially in terms of understanding memes and meme culture and sharing and all of that. But I ask a different question here. And my thesis does that as well, is that when you say generations of electronic literature, whose generations are you talking about? Because people across the world did not have uniform access across these devices, across different spatio-temporal landscapes. So when you are saying first generation, second generation, and when you try to create a typology of this sort, then whose generations are we talking about? How does this work? So we need to go beyond the generational model. But that is for later. First, the Electronic Literature Organizations Committee, led by Noah Wardrop-Fruin, tries to establish a definition that electronic literature refers to works with important literary aspects that take advantage of the capabilities and contexts that are provided by the standalone or networked computer. The context and the computer as a device is the two things that I am trying to challenge, which will hopefully become clear to you in due course of this talk as well. Scott Redberg, in Wherefore Genre, talks about how probably genre should not be the primary way that electronic literature is formed. The most common approach is probably to distinguish and tag categories of work on the basis of purely technical or syntactic measures, borrowing from biology's Fuchsonomy, of course. But he also agrees that this is a kind of technological determinism. Hales also adds that electronic literature is generally considered to exclude print literature that has been digitized and is digital born. Now, this idea can also be challenged. You can create code poetry and you can print it. Even if it exists in print, its origin has to do with digitality. So the media archaeology has to be taken into account. Redberg's 2018 book, Electronic Literature, acknowledges these problems and still goes against his own idea and tries to create five core genres: combinatory poetics, hypertext fiction, interactive fiction, other game like forms, kinetic and interactive poetry, networked writing, and so on and so forth. The first example that you see there is Taroko George by Nick Montfort, which is an online poem where everybody can go and they can remix the poem. That is an example of combinatory poetics. Hypertext fiction, as I showed you, the example that you see is from a text called Patchwork Girl by Shelley Jackson. It's an inspiration from Frankenstein in the digital space. So, after Guillermo del Toro's adaptation, it might be an interesting text to take a look into. Then comes game like forms, where you see interfaces that resemble video games that we play. And we have the idea of literary gaming also by Professor Astrid Enslin. And then you have kinetic and interactive poetry, where of course, the shape of the poem and how the letters and the lines they move and they jump around, as you can see, one example here also becomes important. Network writing simply is collaborative writing, asynchronous writing, or synchronous writing across the digital space in real time. So global formations, are there anything global formation or non-hegemonic formation for that matter, which is why the question mark. Reham Hosni talks about electronic literature in the Arabic context and its non-representation. Perla talks about how electronic literature in Spanish outside the Anglophone domination can be dissent. Ana de Silva talks about, can there at all be something called global? What even is global electronic literature? That means everything is electronic literature, right? But why do we come back to the term global? These are, of course, sarcastic jibes at the idea of electronic literature being Anglo-American, of course, where they say that it both constrains and enables a form of decentralization. So, what are the early formations of electronic literature in India? Ritika Singh's 2016 paper talks about terribly tiny tales, short narratives in social media and their brevity. Shovik Mukherjee takes it forward in his seminal paper, No Country for Electronic Literature, where he laments the impossibility of electronic literature in this country, but he says that non-linear storytelling like Kavad Vachana, for example, can be interesting models of pre-digital electronic literature or pre-digital non-linear storytelling in India. Shanmugapriya, in three very important papers published with Professor Nirmala Menon, talk about the idea of a theoretical typology of electronic literature where they borrow a lot from Hales and Mukherjee. But they also try to posit the techno-icon from the paratextual understanding of Gérard Genet to talk about material spread across uneven surfaces. The techno-icon is created through the material, and its materiality embodies the contingency of events. The material and materiality of digital ecosystem mentioned above come together to produce an effective expression of work. Other than that, in India, Professor Arjun Ghosh from IIT Delhi has a very popular course called Text, Textuality and Digital Media on NPTEL Swayam, where there is a week dedicated to electronic literature. The 2021 Electronic Literature Organization Conference was an important event because one of the main collaborators was someone called DRA.FT, which had an exhibition called Freefall Future.Text, where an exhibition on India and a nation, ELIT, emerged out of a collaborative text lab. And if you are wondering, seeing the image of freefallfuture.text, let me tell you, yes, it is an Excel sheet. There is an entire exhibit that is located in an Excel sheet, which makes us question what is an exhibit, what is an archive after all? Because I was asked this question when I was doing a particular project for a journal called Reviews in Digital Humanities, and I wanted to archive freefallfuture.text as an archive of electronic literature. And my co-editor raised a question that is it an archive? It's just an Excel sheet. So what makes an archive an archive? Metadata integration? Having a fancy UI UX design, funding? What makes the archiveness of an archive successful? These are the questions that we must ask when we deconstruct infrastructures behind electronic literatures. Electronic literature as a body was formed by the likes of myself and a lot of other good-hearted people in the year 2021 when I was writing my master's thesis at FU itself. And then in 2022, the Gyan course was done at Aligarh Muslim University by, again, Professor S. Renslin, called Digital Literatures and Literatures in the Digital. In 2023, Jamia, in collaboration with Electronic Literature India, did, which can arguably be called one of the earliest conferences, dedicated conferences of electronic literature, with a total of 21 sessions spread across 2 days and 66 registered presentations. The Indian Electronic Literature Anthology, the first anthology, came out from IIT Indore, featuring 17 digital works. But the question is, how do we reach a moment of electronic literature? Is that at all possible? Now, in my work, E-Sahitya, or the contested emergence of the electronic within the literary in India, I try to understand the landscape of electronic literature in India, and I find a very unlikely guest, an unlikely presence of the Sahitya Academy. Now, the Sahitya Academy historically has been a body created after the independence of India to promote multilingual literatures across India. But their preoccupation has been mostly the realms of print. So what happens when they dabble in electronic literature? They confuse electronic literature with digital publishing, right? But they do have events also. But all the events and the stakeholders of those events are people who are experts of things that are not electronic literature. So their own expertise relating to print flows into their understanding of electronic literature as well. And then you also see young generation and digital literature, as if the digital is only relegated to the young, right? So now I come to infrastructures. How are infrastructures important in understanding and theorizing an emergent field like electronic literature? Now, this particular quote by Mark Marino, professor in the University of Southern California, in the book called Digital Imaginary, he writes, "It seems as soon as the creating technology becomes normalized, the work is no longer elite." Right? If an Excel sheet becomes normalized, an Excel sheet is an Excel sheet. It is not an archive anymore. Brian Larkin has an important paper in this context called The Poetics of Infrastructure. If I'm not wrong, that is the name of the paper. Please look it up if you're interested. So, coming back to Sultana's reality, this is how Sultana's reality looked to you as well when I was scrolling in my PC. But for my thesis, I conducted an experiment where I made different students read different electronic literature texts, and many of them obviously open it from their phones. And this is how it looks when you open it from a phone. Of course, it's not really optimized to read using your mobile phone device, and the experience completely changes, the materiality changes. You have to constantly zoom in and zoom out, which makes the experience different, for the lack of a better word. But we also have, if there is an Excel sheet which can be an archive, then the Electronic Literature Organization also has something called the Next, which, as they call, is a museum space. They don't call it an archive, they call it a museum space. It has a curatorial statement. It is envisioned as a combination museum, library, and preservation space. If you just write ELO the next in your browser, it will open up. And it is led by Professor Deanie Brigard from Washington State University. While it is extremely, extremely precious to our community, and also the Electronic Literature Collection, which has been the holders of the flagship collections of electronic literature since 2006. And now we are in the process of having ELC Volume 5. The call is out, Electronic Literature Collection Volume 5. If you are seeing these types of text and if you think to yourself, hey, I have also done something like that. So please submit your work for ELC 5. But then we have the freefallfuture.text, which is an archive. We have the Indian Electronic Literature Anthology, which is supposed to be an anthology of electronic literature. But when you look at the entry on the website, it says read book. Why does it say read book? It's not a book. It's an anthology of electronic literature. It's a collection. It should be like what people think is an archive. But when Professor Menon, Shanmuga, Justy, and Deborah, when they were working on this volume with the publisher that they had, they were unwilling to just create a digital collection, an anthology. And they said, no, it has to be or resemble a book in the digital form. So once again, the media archaeology, the specter of the book haunts us again. So you can open it as a PDF, which looks like a book, but it is not a book. And then you have links to these works, and you click on the links and hopefully they open, right? But that also counters dominant understandings, because people might say read book, they might say read Excel, see an Excel sheet and say, oh, this is not electronic literature, this is primitive. You guys don't have your VR headphones and your AR filters and your 50 technological art exhibitions like the Biennales, so we won't take you seriously as electronic literature producers. No, that should not be the case. Different locations bring different experiences, which is why I say electronic literatures with a capital S at the end, denoting the sense of plurality, which allows us to define the field, to historicize the field in multiple different ways. So communities, once again, can also act like infrastructures. Electronic literature organization, the community also serves as an infrastructure. eLit India as a community serves as an infrastructure as well, even though it is mostly a WhatsApp group, which all of you are welcome to join, by the way, if you like, things of this sort. Sahitya Academy mainly have dealt with print, but it also functions as an infrastructure because it is clearly influential in making an understanding about electronic literature. This is what we argue, me, Dibyaduti Roy, and Surajit Koyal, we argue in our recent book chapter called Community and Digitality in and of Indian Digital Humanities. So, what are the politics? Now, finally, we had introductions, the politics of theorization, the difficulties of infrastructures, the possibilities of infrastructures, and finally, politics. So, this is what I call in my thesis as a radical triangle of uneasiness. I borrow this idea from mathematics, with three concentric circles intertwined to form a triangle in the middle. So if you look at it, if you say one circle as English literary studies in India, so there are overlaps with electronic literature in the sense that they have events in India about electronic literature. And then in literary studies, you have, in English literary studies, you also have Sahitya Academy as well. But if you look at the side of infrastructural criticism, then infrastructural critique is probably not is something that we do in electronic literature that is inherent to English literary studies in India. And then finally, the other circle, electronic literature, also features infrastructural criticism, events in India, little bits and bobs, where Indian institutes have collaborated with the Electronic Literature Organization, as I showed you in one or two examples. But my study is within these three circles of literary studies, English literary studies in India, Electronic Literature Organization or Electronic Literature, the field, and institutional criticism. So The difficulties would be to make these seemingly disparate spaces talk to each other. So, what is the state of publishing electronic literature? If we are to operate as academics, how are we supposed to publish? As PhDs, as a recent PhD, it is incredibly important to publish to get through a PhD program. And not just publish in certain types of journals, Scopus indexed Q1 journals. Even when you are at a workplace, as I am now, it's very important for us to publish to get promotions. It's the same thing everywhere, right? So if I type electronic literature in Google Scholar, a very basic search, nothing too advanced. So it says N.K. Hales, right? Doing digital humanities in practice, it's a book chapter. Scott Ratberg, electronic literature, it's a book. N.K. Hales, electronic literature, horizons for the literary, it is a monograph. And finally, Leo Flores's electronic literature as digital humanities, which features third generation electronic literature, was an article in a journal called EBR, and then it got reprinted as a book chapter. But the flagship journal of our field, Electronic Book Review, is not indexed in Scopus. So even if I publish an article and I'm very happy about that article, it won't get me anywhere in my career. Maybe I won't be able to defend my thesis if I show that as a publication, unfortunately. And if we look at, excuse me, if we look at certain journal articles also, you see Scott publishing with DHQ, Digital Humanities Quarterly. And then there is CLC Web that has had one special issue on electronic literature. We have Joseph Tabai, who just retired, write in Poetics Today about electronic literature as world literature or the universality of writing under constraint. But there are a few issues. And then Shanmuga also writes with Professor Menon and Andy in DSH, which is a journal from Oxford University Press, Digital Humanities, Digital Scholarship in the Humanities, right? Now the questions are that journals like DSH and DHQ are overwhelmed with the number of publications that they get because they are the important journals in digital humanities. And DSH used to be, for a very long period of time, the only Scopus indexed Q1 journal, which many people look for as a prestige marker. DHQ probably now is in Scopus Q1, but it wasn't the case even a few years ago. Poetics Today is an extremely prestigious journal where it is difficult for early career scholars to get published. It takes a lot of time, which is not contingent to the timelines required to publish in PhD programs. And then there was only one journal special issue with CLC Web. There are others, and I'll come to that later on, which was not in EBR, edited by Maya, Mark, and Assoucian. So if there are so little production in journals, and journals, when you approach them, when you approach an English studies journal with electronic literature, they will say, oh no, please go to a media studies journal or a digital humanities journal. You go to media studies and they'll say, no, this is literature, go to a literature journal or a digital humanities journal. So where do you go? You only go to DSH and DHQ, they probably have years of waiting before your work actually gets published. So this is a concern that I raised in 2023 in our conference at Coimbra in this particular meeting. In this picture right here, you can see my head right here. And I raised this issue that if there are scholars working in electronic literature in spaces like India and across the world, and if there are no journals, no Scopus Index journals that publish this sort of work, then where do the scholars go? And obviously, it was very important for a community to come together and solve this issue. As a community, as members in a particular community or practitioners of a discipline, it is important that we not just do certain kinds of publication. We not all should submit to the idea of Scopus Index journals. The discipline will die in the lack of diversity and insularity. Really. So in the 2024 ELO Unconference, I pitched a workshop called Publishing E-Lit Research. And in that workshop, what I was doing basically is drumming up hype, Do you want to publish electronic literature research? Do you have an idea? Do you have this? Do you have that? Share your ideas with me. And this is what we did. Please go to this other thing and see that these conversations started in 2023. And I have been thinking about it since much before. And then in the Publishing Electronic Literature workshop, we did it again, me and Shanmuga this time at the ELO conference in 2024, which was online. It was done in collaboration with Florida. You can actually scan this QR code and you can look at our working document where we were jotting down ideas right now. In March 22, 2024, I built a team. Me, Professor Astrid Enslin, Shanmuga Priya, and Dr. Zaira Rizvi, who is currently a postdoc at University of Bergen itself. We built a team to create a dedicated special issue to help early career scholars publish. And this was in 2024, so already 1 year is gone. And then finally, the call for the special issue was released late 2025, and the deadline was 9th February 2025. Early 2026, the entire thing is coming out. We are almost towards the end of production right now. So it takes 3 years for something like this to come to fruition. Therefore, communities can be legitimate infrastructures in sustaining scholarship, especially from the majority worlds pertaining to early career scholars. Reviews in Digital Humanities is a journal that is co-edited by Professor Rupika Risang from Dartmouth and Jennifer Giuliano. They have received a very generous Mellon Foundation grant, and we, myself, Professor Leah Hendrickson from Queensland and Reham Hosni from Egypt, Minya University, we are currently co-editing an issue on electronic literature as well, to put forward the presence of electronic literature across research formats. So what are the challenges? Hegemonic metrics of publication, journal publications, cultural capital. You need to understand technology, you need to have a literary sensibility, you need to have awareness, and then you need to know people to collaborate with them. These are not easy, especially if you think of early PhDs in India. Networking is a privilege. So we as communities, we must build spaces together to sustain scholarship. And it's no different like Narrating Difference or Comparatives in Conversation, which is another community that I have taken a lot of interest in recently. So what are these spaces? If you're interested in digital humanities, there is Dharti, which is Digital Humanities Alliance for Research and Teaching Innovations, where I am a governing body member. There is ADHO, which is Alliance of Digital Humanities Organizations, where I used to be a committee member at some point of time. There is a Critical Infrastructure Studies website where you get resources, reading materials, reading lists. And in terms of video game studies, you have DIGRA, Digital Games Research Association, and you have an India chapter as well, which was led for a long time by Professor Shobhit Mukherjee, who is currently employed by CSSC in Kolkata. And obviously, you have intersections with STS, Science and Technology Studies, and to not just point out, but to also restate it, narratology. There is a very interesting book called Playing at Narratology that explores digital narratology by Daniel Pandey, and I implore you to check it out. So, in terms of leadership and outreach, there are these types of multiple bodies like Association for Research in Digital Interactive Narratives, Digital Humanities Alliance for Research and Teaching Innovations, Alliance of Digital Humanities Organizations, that is the head body of all the digital humanities organizations across the world, Electronic Literature India, Knowledge Commons, Hashtag, ACH, Association for Computers and Humanities. These are the bodies that I have been a part of or am still a part of in administrative capacities, of course, where you can reach out and or we can just have a space to talk amongst each other, which is very important, as we have seen through material gains. That the special issue that we did, the team that I formed, is a direct result of my positionality, privilege, collaboration, and networks. And these spaces must be extended. So, if you're interested, join Elite India, Electronic Literature India, or write to me and we can join forces. This talk obviously is limited in time and scope. If you want to hear broader thoughts about my thesis, my work in general, then I implore you go to the Ardin Social February entry on your website. Just type RARDIN Social 26th February, and you will have a video where I talk in much detail, almost to 1.5 to 2 hours about my work. Or you can tune in to Spotify, the Off Center Podcast's episode number 38, where I engage in conversation with Professor Scott Redberg. So, thank you so much for listening. This is where I end, and my acknowledgements go to Narrating Difference, my lovely listeners, and these are some of my academic social media handles and my email, of course. And you can scan this decorative little QR code to know more about my work. And that's it. Thank you so much. Please, let's engage in conversation and exchange questions and thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shamya, for your talk. We'll now open the floor for questions. Please raise your hands or type out your questions in the chat if you would like to speak. Udbhas has typed it out. I'll read it for you. Thank you for today's talk. I just wanted to ask, is it accurate calling electronic literature as the medium has changed? Further, what happens to the concept of copyright and the publisher? Also, how does electronic literature help someone who doesn't have access to it, like, say, South Sudan? Thank you again.
Thank you so much for your question. I will take them one by one. So, is it accurate to call electronic literature as the medium has changed? I don't see a problem with it because if we call it literature, then we are referring to a system of interpretation of a particular type of texts. And while electronic as a medium, if you're calling it a medium, then the medium has changed. And now people even say digital literature or medical literature, or I don't know, other people work in different fields. So for me, literature obviously is an understanding of a system of interpretation. And if you're talking about literary texts, then I would answer this question as a method to saying that the word text for me is not just a text that consists of printed letters, but I go back to the root textus, that means to weave different things together, which is also something that Professor Hales points out in her piece, which decidedly mentions that literary studies must wake up from its slumber of print and adopt media specific analysis. It's a very dramatic passage. I can share it with you. What happens to the concept of copyright and the publisher? Thank you so much for that question. This is a very, very central understanding in this debate. So, in terms of copyright, it depends on how you are putting your work forward, really. Because Afra's work that I showed it to you, that belongs to Afra. That does not belong to anybody else. You go and you look at that website. It's her work because she goes on tours and she showcases these works in different exhibitions. So it belongs to her. Now, when you talk about publisher, once again, the idea, when we speak of a publisher, the idea of a publisher is extremely print dominated. And it is not applicable to electronic literature at all because there are these questions. Then who will publish electronic literature? Should HarperCollins open a division to publish electronic literature all of a sudden one fine morning? No. The answer is developers. If you look at the world of video games don't have publishers. They have publishers, but they mean something different in the area of video game studies. They have developers, right? And you can access these games from these online communities like itch.io, or you can buy them from Steam. So the entire distribution model is different, and it applies to electronic literature as well. And coming to your final question, how does electronic literature help someone who does not have access to it, like, say, South Sudan? Of course, it does not help them at all. And I can refer to one particular paper called Universal Design in Electronic Literature, which is a response by Dina Larson, who is a disability rights activist, who talks about how in electronic literature or in other forms of media arts, the possibility of a universal design, be it here or anywhere, is absolutely impossible because it cannot accommodate everybody. And if you assume that everybody is accommodated, then that would be a lie. So that would be one way of encountering the question. And similarly, let's say if we talk about graphic novels or comics, then people who are visually challenged or visually impaired, they can't make meaning out of comics. And there has been a lot of debate about it. So universal design is never a possibility, but it is always necessary to raise the questions. Thank you. I hope I have attempted to answer your questions.
I Okay, people are joining now. If anyone has a question, you're welcome to jump in whenever you are ready. Feel free to unmute yourself. In the meantime, I have a question. So, when it comes to the context in India, so how would you read the linguistic and caste hierarchies? Like, how would your framework respond to it?
Yeah, so I'm just referring to something that I did not mention in my talk because I didn't want to make it too complicated. So in my work, I develop a concept called vortextuality, which is vortex plus textuality, which means that the idea of making meaning out of electronic literature gets lost in a whirlpool of intersectional factors, where there is obviously the element of space and time because that particular device may not be available to you at that point of time. For example, I can't see a VR piece of work because I don't have a VR headset, right? And time, because it's not just something that is available to you today, that means it will be available to you tomorrow. It's not that. It may get obsolete. So obsolescence is a very big problem in electronic literature. But the third key factor that I talk about in my work is the element of knowledge. You have to be aware of electronic literature as a discipline. You have to be aware of literary sensibilities. And you need to have the cultural capital to put this all together and find the niche and then to apply the theoretical models to its understanding. And obviously, when we talk about these forms of knowledge, it is obviously directly correlated to privilege. And that can be caste, class, gender, race, language, privileges of all sorts that the entire condition of digitality is replete with. And it is no different for electronic literature at all. But my argument was we must make these things explicit when we theorize.
Okay. Do we have any more questions?
Yeah, hey Shama. So it was a wonderful talk, and it was kind of a walkthrough through electronic literature. I just have it's again going to the definition part. I mean, as you said, it kind of there is a loop problem, and I mean it has to do with the definition of literature in general in some way. And it's kind of something I got from Said. He used to talk about digital humanities and the typical Saidian style. He used to say like people used to write in rocks, then they had papers, and then they invented print. So there are different mediums, but we never had rock literature, or we never had paper literature. So is it exclusively a reference to the medium? In that way, does the medium kind of influence? I mean, influence may be the wrong word, but then that it determine maybe like the way we approach the reading. So I mean, in my understanding, kind of the perspective of my thesis. So literature can be, an experience performed by the reader, and it can be in any medium, and still I can call it literature. So once I make a different distinct category, is there a discursive distinction, something methodological, something fundamentally different in terms of our approach to literature and then electronic literature?
Mm. Thank you so much, Rafid, for that question. That is a lovely, lovely question. And I would start your response by referring to two types of texts. One is called Gramophone Film Typewriter by Friedrich Kittler, where he talks about newer forms of media and communication, I would suggest that if you have these questions in mind, that would be a lovely piece to read. That is number one. Number two is obviously Understanding Media by Marshall McLuhan, where he posits the medium as the message, as a kind of conversation. But references aside, what you were saying is absolutely true. Why do we need to call electronic literature as electronic literature? Why can't we just call it literature and move on? But the thing is, when we are dealing with emergent forms of media, then it becomes important to create a kind of violent typology and just use it to poke at the existing discourse and really posit the difference. Until and unless we have, let's say, a course on post-colonial studies, let's say, which is being taught in India in a department of English, the assumption is that all the texts are print texts. But suddenly, when there is a course on graphic novels, all of the Arijit Sens and Sarnath Banerjees pop up in that course. So why are they not there in a post-colonial studies course? Okay, why is a video game not there in a European philosophy course? So that means these questions of inquiry, these positions, are still very emergent, especially within the literary studies discourse. Which is why, for people like me with a really political agenda behind calling it electronic literature, is to push the idea of electronic literature until it becomes just literature, where I have to drop the term. So yeah.
Okay, yeah. Thank you. I mean, that makes sense. Like, even you have to emphasize
Yeah.
that these forms are also literature.
Yeah.
And the other thing I had, I mean, that's again kind of related. So, how do you, think of this when you said there is a video and then there is a text and then everything is a text? Do you make this, something is text and something is not text? Or is it like at the end of the day, everything becomes text?
That
Is
is
there a
all.
lot of text?
Yeah. Thank you. Well, once again, lovely question. What makes a text and what makes a text not a text is ultimately dependent on who you are and what you think a text to be. So it is the subject position that ultimately makes the value judgment. And there is, for me, there is no superseding the subject position at all. Someone can say that a text only means a print text. And I can say that I can go back to the root of the word text and I can say textus, which means woven together, and I can call a multimodal text just a text. Like electronic literature is not electronic literature is just literature. So a multimodal text is just a text. A film text is just a text. So it's same thing.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, I think somebody has a question in the text. Yeah, if I
Yes. Yes. Shachi has asked a question. She has typed, "Thank you for the talk, Shamya. I was thinking about orality and the use of digital medium in, let's say, its preservation or new methods of archiving memories and histories, and connecting to Rafid's question as well, the act of reading itself that may happen virtually. Do you have any observations on these?"
Okay, so in terms of orality and use of the digital medium in terms of preservation and archiving, I would redirect you to the work of Shumalya Mukhopadhyay, who is currently a faculty at one of the NITs, who has recently published a very interesting paper about the position of oral history right now in India. I don't have the link right now, but just write Sumallya Mukhopadhyay, Mukhopadhyay, and oral history, and you will find that work. So, which has a lot of interesting ideations about oral history and its current use in India. Number one. Number two, there is a body called OHI, Oral History Association of India, which I'm sure many of you are aware of. So, Professor Maya Dodd is one of the people that are very enthusiastic about OHI, and Maya Dodd is a digital humanist. So, the ideas of digital medium and preservations and the digital being used as an analytic and also a method to archive memories and histories is something that has been very prevalent for a very long time. If you look at the 1947 partition archive, a lot of digital affordances have been used there. If you look at the burgeoning field of memory studies in this country, you will find a lot of discourses about building apps and geotagging sites and having AR to talk about stories. and all of that. So absolutely, orality and digitality come into the picture. Connecting to Rafid's question, the act of reading itself that may happen virtually. Can you just unpack what you mean in the second section? What you mean about reading itself that may happen virtually? What is your question there?
Shachi, do you want to unmute and speak? Shachi, are you there?
Hi. Yes, yes. I'm so sorry. I was thinking about how when um, I was thinking about these partition archives that are, or this is just one example that came to my mind where these stories are mapped, recorded, mapped, preserved electronically. And for readers who read these narratives or stories, for them, these oral stories are they reach these oral stories through the digital medium. So what happens to orality there? We are not reading it. It's not it's not written down. Those oral narratives are not written down as literatures, but we may read them through this digital medium in different formats, audio, video, for example. So I was just wondering about this and wanted to know if you have some comments on what happens to orality when we relate it through the digital.
The short answer would be it gets remediated through a different channel. And the best reference to back me up here would be remediation by Professor Richard Grusin and J. David Bolter, where they discuss about exactly the argument that you are building up into the picture, that what happens to artifacts when they get remediated into different forms of media. So yes, obviously the interaction changes and the experience fundamentally changes. But then we have to rethink about the idea of reading in the first place. Does reading just mean using your eyes, or just reading mean close reading? The inherent idea of closeness in reading, which goes back to the conception of reading something very closely, even from a theological standpoint, you may argue, reading the Bible or any text with a lot of attention. So when you listen to something with a lot of attention, when you're playing something with a lot of attention, you can call it close listening, you can call it close playing, but you can also call it close reading because you're reading into it. So reading itself, of course, happens, but reading is not necessarily happens just by reading letters. We can also read images, Rolla Barthes and all of that. So if you can read images, we can read videos too. We can film formal analysis, close reading film texts, and so we can read video games as well, and we can read oral digital preservations of oral memory. So that is how I would respond to your question. I'd attempt to respond to your question. I don't know if it has been successful.
Shachi has typed sure. Yes, thank you. I think Chinmay has a question.
Yeah,
Chinmay, you
hi.
can say.
Yeah, thank you so much for your talk. It was very well structured, and I really appreciated many bits of it. So I have two. I don't know if these are questions, comments, or whatever, but I'd like your thoughts on these things, right? So unlike our eyes, which bring us a world in images, our hands and fingers put us directly in touch with the things in the world, right? So touching things directly, and you also feel themselves, these things also being touched at the same time. Your hands and fingers therefore are your first medium in that sense, right? So it is through the digital also comes through you to through the senses, right? I need to press buttons on a laptop, I need to see the thing. And so I just wanted to see if you had any thoughts on that phenomenological approach to this. And two, I don't know if this, again, the second thing is a little more scattered, and I am happy to take it back, because it's not very well formed. But it seems to me that you are doing the important work of critiquing, this generational model. Like, okay, there is this first generation of electronic media, second generation of electronic media, and then you're talking about, okay, wait, but whose electronic media is it? Is it the Western, the usual white male cis het subject who is part of this? I'm wondering if there is if you are also entertaining an internal critique of your own critique, where you are maybe. It seems to me that most of this is happening in English, right? And I'm not saying that, but like inherently that's a bad language or anything. That's not what I'm saying. Uh, so I'm wondering if there is something that can, talk about how, again, I'm coming to you as a comparatist. I work with Marathi, Kannada, English as well. Um, and it seems to me that it might be better to move. Again, I'm not trying to tell you what to do or anything like that. I'm just trying. It might have been a better, because as someone situated in our location, in our particular place, it might have been like, I'm wondering what is your stance on that? Like, why not look at our languages? And I know that there's not much in digital spaces in this, but some of one of my friends, and I'm sure you might even know her, Deepshika Behra, also part of the Ojai thing that you mentioned. She's also working on uh, quote unquote low resource languages, and using the digital medium to sort of skip the script phase of a language to archive it through AI digitally, and that seems to be extremely productive, because then you sort of immortalize it, and then so I think you know where I'm getting at. I hope that makes sense. So these are two things.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chinmay, for that lovely question. I will first answer your question. A beautiful question, really ties into the discussion that we had. When we say the word digital, we use the word digit. Do you have any idea what the word digit means or where it comes from? It means fingers.
Sorry, yeah, I was muted. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I'm also like borrowing this idea from Briankle Chang, who's also a
Yes,
professor.
of course. Yeah. So it comes from fingers. So, and even when McLuhan talks about understanding media, his caption to the text is the extensions of man. Take man with a dollop of salt. Okay. So the extensions of man, really. And if we look into the extension, I will point at two philosophers, Clark and Chalmers, who have this conception of the extended mind, that is there. So take the mind body duality to a stretch, really stretch it so thin, where we ask a question: is there at all something called an extended mind? So this is the argument that Clark and Chalmers makes in their paper, which was written in the 90s, that if there is a patient with Alzheimer's and they're using a notebook to write something down, is it a part of their mind or is it external to them? Similarly, when we are using our digits to touch something, to click something, to press at something, does that consist of the experience of reading? Of course it does, which is what Espen Orsett talks about in the 1997 work, Cybertext, or Godic literature, where he talks about the non-trivial act that we do in the idea of traversal. He does not use the term reading, he uses the term traversal, right? So the non-trivial work is scrolling, zooming, pinching, and all of that. So that is how we can recontextualize it. That even the Greek philosophers, Plato, if I'm not wrong, was not very fond of this whole business of the something written somewhere else. Because it is external to the human body, which is, let's put it that way, impure. So now and then we have extended mind thousands and thousands of years later, and re-questioning. And now in 2013 and after the boom of digitality, Clark and Chalmers have posited this question again, rethinking the extended mind, which is that does the internet then become a part of our mind? Yes, no. We are interacting with it, and now with AR goggles, with ChatGPT, with agentic AI, if I am allowed to use that word here. So where does our experiences end, and how does it intermesh with our physical beings? And obviously the phenomenological questions comes into the picture. That who we are, how we are, defines how we read. And when I say how we read, it also means that am I reading from a laptop? where I'm using a touchpad to scroll, or I'm using a phone where I just have the screen where I'm scrolling, where there is no keyboard, with no nothing. How fast is my internet, and all of that. So that would be my attempt at answering your first question. My attempt at answering your second question would be multilinguality, a very important question that you have raised, central to any form of DH discussion in India and around the world right now. And you are right. If I am saying electronic literature, why am I not saying electronic English literature? You can obviously make that claim. And you're most welcome to do so. But there has been work about electronic literature done in multiple other languages in India, and I will give you some examples. Right, there is someone called Jayashree Chauhan who is working on electronic literature in Rajasthan. There is someone called Prakriti Bhatt who is working on reading electronic literature in Gujarati state universities. There is someone called Kavitha who is working with trance experiences in archives of electronic literature, creating an archive of trance electronic literature. Whether you agree, disagree with these typologies and brandings is personal, but there are advances in terms of multilinguality and intersectionality. And then in the first anthology of electronic literature that came out from IIT Indore, there are works that are done in Bangla, there are works that are done in Malayalam. But even then, when we go beyond English, then there becomes a question of which are the high resource languages and which are the low resource languages. Are there electronic literature in Bodo? Probably not. Right? Bengali is an extremely high resource language with its colonial privilege. So yes, these questions are there, and there are examples of electronic literature in different Indian languages. And when you are talking about OHI and work, and in terms of digitizing multilingual work, then of course then there is this software called Lipikar that was developed by Arjun Ghosh and his colleagues at IIT Delhi, which works towards doing OCR for Indian languages. I suggest you may take a look if you want. If you're not already aware, recently won the Gyan Bharatam Puraskar from the Indian government. So these things are obviously there. I'm sorry if I'm losing track of any of your questions. But yes, and borrowing, segueing from privilege, do I interrogate my own positionality? Of course, I am a cishet upper class, upper caste man. Of course, I have my biases, which is why I argue for a kind of plurality in the act of doing historiography itself, that there cannot be a singular history of electronic literature. Multiple people will write histories from multiple perspectives, which is a core understanding behind my theorization of electronic literature with a capital S at the end. You're very welcome.
Do we have any more questions? So, if there are no further questions, we can bring this session to a close. Do you have something to add?
Not necessarily. It has been a lovely interaction, and thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. It's very humbling. Thank you.
Okay. I sincerely thank Samya for taking time out of his schedule to give us such an insightful talk today. Thank you everyone who has attended and participated in this session. We hope to see you all at the future events of the Research Forum. Good night.